today I thought I'd talk a little bit about the obstacles to metta that can arise in our hearts and minds, because inevitably as we start to cultivate any of these practices we'll see what the blockages are. In a way the metta will reveal that to us, which is still restricted or resistant or constricted. So aspects of the heart which are not quite fully open yet. And as we know that metta is a great antidote to ill will, it's the best antidote. But also, like, dwelling in non-aversion is the foundation for metta. So the two kind of work together, and so far we've been sort of using metta to overcome ill will, but now I wanted to look a little bit at how ill will can help to, overcoming ill will can help to release more love. Yeah? So the Buddha says that hatred is never overcome by hatred, it is only appeased by love. This is the eternal law, which is very beautiful. And there's all kinds of examples in the suttas about people who are able to overcome anger. They also say that there are three kinds of people. I mean, we all, of course, until we're enlightened, have some amount of ill will and anger when things don't go our way. It's just part of suffering. It's part of the First Noble Truth. But there are three kinds of people, and one, they say, are like people who draw a line on a rock with chisel and hammer. So this is a person whose anger is really, really deeply ingrained, and layer upon layer of resentment and ill will that they haven't been able to let go of, so it builds and it builds. Then the second type of person is the person whose anger is like a line drawn on sand. So they get angry from time to time, but it also disappears quite quickly. And then the third type is pretty rare, and they're the ones like they draw a line on water. Doesn't even make any impression at all on that water. And in the suttas there's a lovely story about Sariputta, who is the Buddha's right-hand monk, so he's the one that's considered equal to the Buddha in wisdom, like his eldest son, if you like. And there's this story where I think a Brahmin who was from... The Brahmins at that time were used to being kind of the upper class and the ones that were like the religious people, so some of them really didn't like the Buddha and his followers. They call them kind of shaven-headed, good-for-nothings, you know, kind of beggars, baldies and all that stuff. So even the Buddha had plenty of adversaries. And Sariputta was famed to be an enlightened being, so free from anger completely. And this particular Brahmin wanted to check him out, so he said, I can make him angry, you watch me, I can make him angry, it's easy. And then one day when Sariputta was an arms round, he came up behind him and he gave him a big blow on the head. And Sariputta walked on a few steps and then sort of turned around and went, what was that? And just carried on walking. And at that the Brahmin was really even more angry and furious because he hadn't succeeded to, you know, cause any reaction in Sariputta. And so he went down on his knees and he said, I'm really sorry, like, please forgive me, it was me that did that to you. And Sariputta said, okay, no problem, you're forgiven, which made him feel even more guilty. So then he said, well, please can you accept today's meal from me? You know, I want to offer the food to you today. As you've noticed, I can't cook for myself, so every day here also somebody offers me the food, which is very nice and gratefully appreciated. Even more so that you didn't give me a blow on the head before you cut off my lunch. I don't know how I'd react to that. But Sariputta was fine with it, but other people around him, you know, his devotees were very upset still with this Brahmin, and they said, oh, we're going to get him, you know, we're going to get revenge, you can't just let him get off like that. And Sariputta turned to them and said, was it me or you that they struck? And they were like, it was you, Venerable Sir. And he said, well, I've forgiven him, he's asked my forgiveness and I gave it. Go home, off you go. So that was the end of that. So Sariputta was this great monk who, you know, basically was free from anger, and especially if somebody would ask for forgiveness, he would just give it straight away. And this is one of the kind of ways that we're trained also by Ajahn Brahm, is that if somebody ever asks forgiveness, always give them that forgiveness. Yeah. And also if somebody ever confesses something, or you know, no matter how bad it is, no matter how wrong their action of body, speech or mind was, always, you know, accept that they've told the truth, so please forgive them. You know, there doesn't need to be any more holding on or any more punishment over that. One of the things that Ajahn Brahm always does is, if you have done something wrong and you ask him for a punishment, is he says you have to do 50 strokes of the cat. In Australia, the cat was this very evil kind of punishment that they used, I think, for, I don't know, criminals in the past, maybe the Aboriginals, I'm not sure, because it was a sort of indigenous punishment. Yeah, they used a kind of whip. So that was called 50 strokes of the cat, like a black belt or something.
I think it was
like a leather belt.
in the Navy.
Yeah.
Okay.
In the British Navy.
Could be,
They
yeah.
got the cat, yeah.
Right, yeah. So
The
they call
cat.
that 50 strokes of the cat. And Ajahn Brahm actually told one of his Anagarikas once, when he'd eaten sandwich in the afternoon, he said, "Oh, your punishment," because you really wanted a punishment, right? Actually, it's no big deal that you eat a sandwich in the afternoon. It's not actually an ethical problem. It's more a rule of convention than a rule of like something morally wrong, you know. So, this poor Anagarika came to Ajahn Brahm and said, "But you must punish me or I'll do it again." So he said, "Okay, you get 50 strokes of the cat." And the poor thing turned white and started trembling because he actually thought it was this leather belt. Until Ajahn Brahm said, "No, it's just the cat, the pussy cat, like the little bamboozle." You just give it a stroke. I had to do that the other day when I ate the crisps. He told me, "Have you got a soft toy?" I said, "I haven't actually, but I've got a little bamboozle." So I had to stroke. But there's something very wise in that, because it's about being gentle and being, soft and forgiving and not taking our mistakes so seriously, or imagining that we're not going to make mistakes, because we are, we're human beings, and it's about how we relate to ourselves kindly and accept and acknowledge our shortcomings, But just another little story or image that comes to mind about the capacity of the human being to have loving kindness in the most extraordinary situations was just a photograph I saw a while ago on social media. And there wasn't much of a story around it, but the image was so powerful for me. It was of first I couldn't understand what was going on. There was a huge group of African Americans, so black people in America, and a few white people at the other side of the camera, but one white person was on the ground. And this black woman was standing over him and sort of protecting him, and all these kind of rods and I don't know what, sticks from the other black people were coming at this white man. And it said something like that this white person was involved in, he was one of the Ku Klux Klan or a far-right Nazi group. And the black group had turned aggressive towards him, which you can imagine they may, have had good reason to, and also perhaps it was a self-defense. And this black woman was protecting him.
She was a teenager. She was only 18.
Really?
I know that. Yeah.
Okay. Wow. It was such a powerful image. That she could see something in him, even though he was so full of hatred and racism and all kinds of, things that we condemn as being evil and wrong and cruel. But she could still see that this person is a human being and develop compassion and that wish to protect. And who knows, she could have also been like in the firing line, for the sticks and weapons. But I just found that really beautiful. So I wanted to talk a little bit about removing resentment from the sutta's perspective. And the first thing I want to draw on is about how to remove anger or irritation, or even just like a mild fault-finding mind towards others. Because this is something that happens in daily life. Situations or other people irritate us, and we tend to carry those irritations around. So you can see this as a kind of like daily maintenance of the mind. So you're trying to keep it quite clean so that it's not that you only have to face that stuff when you get to the meditation cushion. You're actually doing this kind of maintenance work in everyday life. So this comes under the category again of this sense restraint, which is a very strange word in English. But it's around ways of looking that help to rouse and to stimulate and to generate more metta, more love, more compassion. Yeah? So we have to change our perceptual habits from always kind of zooming in on the faults, and to actually not only seeing the good but searching for the good in a person, right? So in this sutta, the Buddha talks about 5 different situations, and the first one is a person whose verbal behaviour is pure, so they may say and speak in kind ways, in pleasant ways, but their bodily behaviour is impure. So this is already showing the kind of paradox that we're neither one thing or the other. Nobody's entirely good or bad or always pleasing to us. Sometimes people make great promises, like politicians comes to mind, but their actions are quite different in the end, you know. So they may actually have good intentions, but they somehow don't pull through. It may also be an example, say in a relationship, somebody promises to be trustworthy and to be committed, but then they go and, you know, break your trust and have adultery with somebody else. So there are all different kinds of ways that a person's verbal behaviour can be good and their bodily behaviour fails to follow the same standards, you know. And so the Buddha says this is like, what was that? Oh yeah, this is like a rag, like on the floor, like a horrible, dirty, soiled rag. And imagine that a monastic like myself, who lives in, it's supposed to be a rag robe, but it's actually quite a decent one. But they do get holes in them, and then we have to stitch them together. So we basically need to have the occasional rag. So this person is walking, and they see this really dirty rag on the floor, but instead of dismissing it entirely and throwing it in the bin, they take their foot and they kind of, with one foot, they tear away the piece which is still good, and then they pick it up, shake it off, and take it home and wash it. And they can even make use of it as a patch when the robe gets torn. And so this is a simile for the person whose verbal behaviour is pure. So we try to take the part of that person that we can use to generate wholesomeness, to generate kindness. Yeah? And so we can even find that we can use some of that. And the dirt on the rag is like their conditioning, all the layers of, you know, their past experience, maybe the way they were brought up, the way they've been treated in the past that have led them to be, you know, not very well behaved and behaving in ways that harm themselves and other people. So we can understand that that dirt is a layer on the rag, but it's not the rag itself. Yeah? It can be washed, it can be changed. So then the next simile, which I relate to a little bit more, is the one of somebody whose verbal behaviour is impure, but their bodily behaviour is pure. So I think, you know, it's quite easy to meet people like this who are quite rough in their manner, but actually what they do is good deeds. And it just brought to mind, the Buddha says this is like a pond covered in algae or weed. So inside that pond there's a lot of pure water, but you have to first remove the weed to the side. And he says it's as though you're parched and thirsty, scorched from the heat after a long journey, and you're coming to that pond to try and drink water to quench your thirst. And in this simile it means quenching the anger, you know, quenching that kind of parched sense that anger gives you when you feel exhausted by it and burnt up by it. You need to drink the water of loving kindness. So what you would do is try to separate the algae, and then you can jump into the pool and drink as much as you want with cupped hands. Yeah? So this reminded me of a lady that I knew when I was working in a care home. Probably the last job I had, actually. The last paid job, which was in 2001. It's quite a long time ago. And the women there were often single mothers living on the breadline, like barely surviving. I think she basically fed her kids from like bags of crisps and stuff, and had quite a lot of kids. And most of them were on like the minimum wage, which at that time was about £3.60. And she had pretty bad language. It was effing this and effing that, and you know, even about the residents, she'd really swear and kind of come out with quite harsh language. But I started to get used to her, because when I worked with her, she was just incredible. Like, she'd be the first person in when somebody called the button, and she'd take off the dirty sheets, put the clean sheets back on, and we'd be doing this throughout the night on 12-hour shifts, you know, sometimes 3 or 4 times. One lady or one old man could be 3 or 4 times kind of soiling the bed, because it was a place for elderly, mentally infirm people, so last stages really of dementia and incontinence and all of that. But this woman would just get right in there without any complaint, and you know, I could just see that she loved these people. It wasn't just a job to her, it was her whole, you know, life. And she said to me, I'd rather do this, I could get a job for the same price working in the shop, but what good would that do? You know, I want to be with these people. They need to have people who are not going to harm them or hurt them. So she was very rough in her manner, but it was just a veneer, and the body behaviour was actually beautiful, really quite impressive. I mean, sometimes these people were eating their own feces, you know, it was at that stage of dementia. It was really very distressing, but, you know, she'd just go in there and clean them up and carry on the duty. You know, and these were exhausting shifts, I can tell you. I only did it for 3 months, but she was doing it for like her main job for a long, long period of time. So with these kind of people, we look for the beauty, we look for the goodness, and that stimulates the metta in us, the loving kindness in us. So we can start to use every situation in life to just generate more kindness, more goodness in ourselves, instead of getting irritated by little things that people do wrong or say wrong. Yeah. So then the next one is when there's a person who whose verbal and physical behaviour is not very skillful. But in the suttas it says from time to time they gain a kind of opening of mind. So it means from time to time they get some sort of peace, and they're not always a pain in the bum. So the Buddha says this is like a little puddle on the floor, sort of brown and murky, and perhaps sometimes the sediment might settle, but you can't really go in there with your hands and drink it, or you can't take a cup and drink it, because that would just stir it all up again. So in that kind of case you actually have to get down on your hands and knees and just drink straight from the puddle. Right? So again, remember, this is for quenching the thirst of somebody who's exhausted and parched and weary from the anger, right? Because we have so much anger in our heart at this time. And then the next person is somebody who gets no opening of mind at all. And this is somebody who you just find it very difficult to see any goodness in at all. Their behaviour is pretty terrible, and it's quite easy to feel shocked, maybe afraid of these people. But the Buddha says this is regard such a person as somebody who's gravely ill, afflicted and suffering. And in the same way that this person is far from the village ahead of them, far from the village behind them to get any medicine, you have to wish that they get that medicine. They're sick and they need medical attention. So in the same way we wish, may this person, stop creating so many bad deeds of thought, body and speech, and actually start to create goodness, create good karma for themselves in the future, because otherwise they're only going to get sicker. So in this kind of case it's an example of compassion. We don't know why they are the way they are, but we just want them to come out of their sickness, because anger is a kind of sickness. We can't see straight when we're angry, and it's never a good idea to act when you're feeling angry. Sometimes it's tempting to write an email or something when you're feeling upset with somebody, and I do it, but I'm very careful not to press the button, just write it out so that I feel a bit better, and then afterwards I look at it and I'm like so glad I didn't send it. So it's never a good idea to act with an angry mind, because you just, afterwards you really regret it. And sometimes people are going through things we can't imagine. I always remember this one nun in a particular monastery who was just grumpy, and she's generally quite grumpy. And I just said to her one morning, she sneezed during breakfast, and I said, "Oh, bless you," and she said, "It's only a cold, you don't have to say bless me." And of course I thought, ooh. I was kind of tempted not to even say hello to her anymore. But then I heard from somebody that she'd actually, something tragic had happened in her life. I won't say what it is, but she'd lost somebody very close to her, one of the worst things that could really happen to a person, I think. And my whole attitude changed completely. I actually thought, isn't it incredible that she can be a nun and that she can live in this kind of place, and that she's come through that and really wishes to be of service and do something noble in the world. And then I just asked myself, how come I couldn't have given her that benefit of the doubt beforehand? Why do we have to know that in order to treat people kindly? It certainly helps to know those things, because it's natural that if we have more understanding, that yields more compassion. But sometimes we can assume that people have been through things we can't, really imagine. Yeah. Sometimes we've been through things that don't seem particularly bad, but they've had a deep impression, they've left deep scars in us, and we're all fragile. We're all brothers and sisters in old age, suffering and death, as the Buddha said. So, and these kind of reflections help you to come out of feelings of isolation. There's a nice contemporary writer called Kristen Neff, who you've probably all heard of, who writes about self-compassion, and she's identified various elements in self-compassion, and one of them is to recognise our common humanity as an antidote to feelings of isolation, which can block self-compassion. We can easily get into this idea of, oh, I'm the only one, that feels this way, and nobody else goes through what I go through. I have to be careful with that, because I am the only bhikkhuni in the country, and as far as I know, I'm the only nun that's ever set anything up totally from scratch without a trust or anything. So I can start to feel like kind of isolated. And then sometimes people with all the best of intentions, they say, well, what are nuns like? Or, oh, nuns are like this, nuns are like that. And you feel like, oh, I'm just this like group of people. I mean, actually, I'm an individual, you know. And just, I was reflecting on it today. I mean, there's as much variety between any one of, you know, the lay people in this room, any two women of the same age, as there is between any monastic and any lay person. You know, we're all completely different. So none of us are particularly special in our sort of isolation. We're all unique, and that creates society. You know, so there's nothing that we need to feel isolated about. We're all kind of weird and quirky in our own ways. And yet we're all so similar, right, in other ways. And the Buddha said the senses are on fire with greed, hatred and delusion. We all have this kind of inner burning, you know, we have this suffering which is universal, and what a relief to realise it is universal. There's a nice little story in Bhante G's book that I just read. Well, it's a little synonym, and he talks about this fire sermon where the Buddha says, you know, the eye is on fire with greed, craving and delusion, the sound, the ear is on fire with it. You know, we hear some unpleasant words and it really, you know, starts the flames of anger in our heart. And he says, you know, firemen always wear like fire-resistant suits or whatever before they go in to attack any fire. And they're taking their equipment and they check that their fire engines are working properly and everything. So you don't just go in there without any protection. So he says, like, loving kindness is the protection that you take in with you when you meet, you know, any of these experiences at any of the sense doors. Yeah, so it's loving kindness, also compassion, also equanimity, that funny old word, but a sense of being able to just understand that things are arising and things are passing. These aren't here to last. And this is life. You know, we can meet life with an open heart. And what was the lovely quote that you shared with me? The love that is as big as life itself. Something like this, something about like equanimity. Yeah. So equanimity can contain everything, even the unpleasant. Yeah, and this is in a way the more refined type of love. Equanimity is not bland or unfeeling. It's actually something that is very. It contains a kind of blend of compassion and wisdom that can hold everything. That can hold all sorts of phenomena and understand these are also passing. This is part of life. We can't avoid that, and the avoidance just creates more suffering. Right. So the whole idea is to just keep on opening the heart. So with this sick person, we have to consider them, like they don't know what they're doing. You know, they can't see straight, and that's why they behave the way they do. And then the last person is quite interesting because this is a person who's pure in both verbal and bodily behaviour. And it's kind of rare, but we're all pretty good, I think. You know, you could kind of consider any of us as being on that. Certainly the way things are working here, I think the way we're all trying to relate to each other is with a really good motivation and intention. Saying kind words, cooking lovely food, you know, doing all the little duties that are there and doing that bit more as well. And yet still, you know, we can have aversion towards people like this. And sometimes it's actually jealousy or resentment, you know, because we somehow think that they're different and we want some of what they've got. But the way the Buddha says to see it is to see it like a beautiful pond of clear water that you can really jump straight into and swim and drink as much as you want of. And also after you get out of the water, you can rest under the shade of the trees and you can relax. There's maybe meadows and flowers and all kinds of things. So this person isn't somebody you need to feel jealous of or resentful towards. It's somebody who can be of great benefit. And their inner beauty can inspire you in the sense that you also have that potential. So when we see people like this, it shouldn't bring sort of any more delusion around them being very different, but rather that they are a human being, they've achieved this, we can do it too. You know, our materials might be slightly different, what we have to work with might be slightly different, but given the same conditions that they have, we're going to have the same results. It's just a matter of patience and time. So this really helps us, and in that way we can actually gain confidence in that person, and that confidence gives rise to inspiration in us and confidence that we too can purify our minds. Sometimes we need these kind of role models. That's why the Buddha said wise friendship is also the whole of the holy life, the whole of any spiritual life. Yeah. Even friends who are further on the path, that's the ideal. Maybe not for them, but for us. But they don't mind at that stage anyway. They just have compassion. Yeah. They see everyone like they're Dhamma son or Dhamma daughter or Dhamma bamboozle. So that's about removing resentment to others, and really it's again about this perceptual shift. So just learning to use our mind in a wise way, like look at it in any way you can in order to stimulate seeds of compassion and metta. But I wanted to get on to oneself a little bit more and start looking in our internal world. So starting with our thinking, because the thoughts are a place where we create a lot of suffering for ourselves, a lot of stress, especially when we start to believe in those thoughts. And the Buddha actually said that the thoughts need to be overcome in order to enter into deep states of stillness, quite obviously, right? Because as long as the mind's thinking, it can't really be still. It's like you're creating ripples all the time on the lake, and the lake can't settle down enough for you to be able to see what's at the bottom of that lake clearly. So this is from the Vitakasantana Sutta, and it's a very beautiful sutta on the 5 different ways to overcome thoughts. And it's also called the Adicitta Sutta in Chinese, which means the higher mind. So it means it's a training towards jhanas, things like deep states of samadhi. So you can't get to those without first meeting some of this stuff and working with it in a skillful way. And the first thing that the Buddha talks about as the best way to overcome thinking, and not only thoughts that are based on greed, hatred and delusion, but eventually all thoughts, is called substitution. So in substitution what we're doing is replacing an unwholesome thought with a more wholesome thought. So as you may notice, we've been doing that since you arrived, by taking thoughts of metta and planting them in the mind, or supplanting any other thoughts that might be, I don't know, just irrelevant thoughts or distracting thoughts or even negative thoughts. So we're trying to gently introduce a different kind of thought without pushing the other one away, but just kind of gently substituting and introducing that to the mind. And after a while the mind realises this is something beautiful, this is something to follow, and it becomes quite easy to get on that train. So he said it's like if you want to remove a coarse peg. I mean, we don't really have pegs anymore, but you know, say like if you're in Australia, we used to build some steps out of wood. So we'd have like 2 posts of wood and then like a wooden step. Mm-hmm. And you'd have a kind of peg in there to sort of, I can't quite remember how it went, but to kind of keep the step on the wood. You'd have a kind of wooden peg. So he said it's like there's a coarse peg and you use a smaller peg, a finer peg to push out the coarse one. So in the same way you use a fine thought to push out the coarse thought. But eventually the idea is that you come to the place where there's no thought, but you can't go there just like that. Yeah, so that's why the metta can be really helpful. And another thought that you can sometimes use, like say in Mahasi traditions, some Burmese traditions, they start to contact the internal feelings, say like anger or pain in the body, and instead of rolling in that, they just choose one word for it. So okay, instead of going into a whole storyline about this happened to me and that wasn't fair and this person should never have done it, just anger. So that's already like reducing the thought to something very simple and much cleaner, much clearer. So you're coming out of this kind of really disturbed mind state. Yeah, oh yeah, another little example that I remembered from my rains retreat was that you know, the inner tyrant can be very subtle. Like yesterday we talked about some of the more coarser voices and sort of ways that we deprecate, self-deprecate and put ourselves down a lot. But I noticed one day after a nice meditation, just sitting in the sunshine, and I think it was the sunset and the moon was coming up, and I realised I had to shave my head. Like today I had to shave my head. And the voice came up, oh, you can do it when you go back to your cottage. And I mean, you wouldn't really think that's a tyrannical voice, but I just noticed that I was telling myself what to do, like, you can do it, you know. And it felt quite bossy, because I was in a very gentle state of mind. And then I just caught myself, and I'm like, hang on a minute. When would you like to shave your head? Maybe you'd like to shave it when you go back, maybe you wouldn't, you know. You can if you want to, but you don't have to. So I just changed it around and said, okay, what would you like to do? And it was so lovely to be met like that and to be asked that question. And it helped me to kind of direct my experience back to my body, back to my emotional world, and away from that kind of compulsive, got to do this next, got to do that next. Because when we do that, we don't give ourselves time to just like feel what we actually need right now. You know, we're somewhere else, and It's just a little bit abrupt. So after I asked myself that, I sort of forgot about it and went back to my cottage, and I realised actually I want to meditate. And probably if I'd have told myself I can do it when I go back, I'd have just automatically done it. But actually I had a nice meditation and then shaved it later and maybe had a later night, and it was really lovely. And it's just interesting when you meditate how you see these subtle habits. And then I also realised, I mean, it's okay to say to myself, you can do it then, but that's probably what the kind of thing I say to other people as well. Oh, you can do it, such and such, you can do this, you can do that. And it is kind of bossy. They used to call me bossy actually at school, so I'm probably still a bit bossy. But it's all because that's the way we talk to ourselves, you know. If somebody else is rough with you, it's because that's the way they talk to themselves. A friend of mine who I ordained with, after years and years and years, started to realise that she used to really boss herself around, like swearing at herself. And when she told me, I was just shocked. But the thing is, that's how she'd heard it from her mum, you know. And so, yeah, she behaved that way towards other people from time to time. If something really triggered her, you know, it would just come out, because the deep conditioning is somewhere there buried, until we've looked at it. It's all in there. So it's never really a person's fault. Yeah. I mean, that's actually the same person that physically attacked me in the end. And when that happened, her mom, she said to me, "Oh, it's because she loves you." And I thought, wow, okay, you know, but for some people, if you're brought up in an abusive family, that is what love looks like, right? And they don't know any different. So it's a sign of strong emotion, you know, that somebody cares, and that's why they want to hurt you, because you're hurting them. Unfortunately, that's sometimes the way we're taught to love. So that's the substitution, and I'll just go quickly through the other methods because I want to get into working with the emotions in the body as well. But the next method, if that doesn't work, and these are always sequential again. So the first one is the substitution and learning how to speak to ourselves gently, dialogue with ourselves as though we were dialoguing with a really good friend, you know. So not you can do that, but would you like to do such and such? So just treat yourself the way you would a really close friend. And then the next one is seeing the danger in unwholesome thoughts, in angry thoughts. So it's pretty easy to see the danger in anger. I mean, it has straight away a very unpleasant sensation, a very unpleasant feeling, causes you to be in knots. You can't sleep, you miss out on all the benefits of metta, right? Sleeping easily, being dear to devas and humans and animals. On the contrary, it really causes destruction in community, and friendships break down and all of that sort of thing. So the idea of reflecting in this way is to kind of cause the mind to recoil from angry states of mind. So it's something like, you know, you constantly reflect until you realise that the minute the anger comes up, it's like you pull your hand away from a hot fire because you recognise that it's hot. Yeah. I've got a toaster in our little monastery, and it's supposed to be a good one, but it's boiling hot when you put the toast in. And after you've touched it a few times by mistake, you know not to do that anymore. So it's the same thing with anger when we reflect on perhaps things that have happened in the past where we've really blown our fuse and lost a friend over that. You know, we bring that up and just, it's like re-educating yourself. So that's the next thing to do. And then if that doesn't work, the next one's quite interesting because it's about forgetting, ignoring and not giving attention to that thought. So this is kind of, again, a perception thing. So it's like you try to keep the good stuff in the centre of the screen. If your mind is like a screen, or, I mean, I think of the mind as more spherical, but, you know, you can have the unwholesome thoughts there, but just don't bring them to the middle. Just don't give them any energy. Because whatever you give energy to tends to come to life and last longer. It's like you're sustaining it with fuel. So stop giving it fuel, and then it sort of drops off the edges of the screen. It's like when you look through the binoculars, you can focus on absolutely whatever you want to, you know. You can look for the birds or you can look for the water. When you look at the birds, you don't really see the fields. When you look at the fields, you don't see the river, you know. So we can choose how to use our mind. And then the next one is called stilling the thought formation, which means kind of seeing where these thoughts are coming from and not driving them. So like sometimes if you're in like a long retreat, at least for me, it usually takes a bit of time for the thoughts to really calm right down. And then sometimes you can almost see like the pre-verbal, the thought wants to come, but it doesn't quite formulate into a thought. So you can see that there's a little bit of restlessness or a little bit of wanting something, and that's where the thought comes from. So in the simile, the Buddha says it's like you're walking quickly, and then you say to yourself, why am I walking quickly? What if I walk more slowly? And then you say, oh, why am I walking slowly? What if I sat down? And then what if I lay down? So bit by bit, it's like putting the brakes on and just gradually kind of pulling back from the thinking, back to where they're coming from. Yeah? So that's kind of hard to explain, but I think it's one that's not very easy to understand, but I think it's an interesting one to reflect on. Because of course, if there's no craving or greed or delusion, then the thoughts aren't going to come up. So it's starting to move back to the source of where all this is arising from. And this is a big part of the wisdom in the Buddha's teaching. It's not only seeing things arise and pass away, but it's seeing what causes them to arise and pass away. Yeah. And then only in the last case, when it's absolutely imperative to stop the thought, the Buddha says you should crush it with your mind. But this really means like when the thought's going to lead to a very damaging action, like maybe you're about to break your sila or abuse or hit or shout at somebody, then you have to actually rein it in completely. So this is a kind of last resort. And then the Buddha says that if we do this, the mind becomes stilled and quieted internally, steadied, stilled and brought to unity. So this is the whole sort of movement towards samadhi again, using thinking and learning to deal with thoughts in a really wise way. But then the last bit I wanted to talk about, we've got another 10 minutes, is about emotions and feelings and how to meet our emotional world inside. Because objects of anger are just objects, we wouldn't get angry with anybody if we didn't have those seeds of anger within ourselves. So at the same time as working with sense restraint in daily life and working with the thoughts, which is moving closer to an experience of anger, we need to learn to be able to hold our experience at the emotional, at the physical level in a field of loving kindness, so that we can open up to it. So the Buddha says, that there is suffering and there's a way out, but he also says we have to understand that suffering in order to find the way out. So we can't actually let go until we've met something. You can't just skip a step. That's what they call spiritual bypass, right? And this same person that I knew before, she said to me once that I hate myself, therefore I want to transcend myself. And again, I was kind of shocked because I didn't realise that was possible with practice. I always felt that practice brought you straight into contact with a direct experience that you couldn't really hide from. But if the mind has so much aversion, it just can't meet experience. It meets it in order to try to escape. And that never works. All those kind of difficult conditionings are still inside us, and we haven't learned to actually open our heart to them. So we've in a way given them a lot of power. Yeah. It's like the little story that Ajahn Brahm tells again. It's from the suttas about the anger-eating demon. Have to tell that one really, because the anger-eating demon is this, like you see it in your own mind, an emotion or a thought or something really difficult, an inner demon that comes up. And your immediate response is, I don't want this, like it's actually quite scary and you want to just drive it out straight away. But unfortunately this demon eats anger, so the more anger you give it and the more you say I don't want it, it just grows and gets bigger and gets more scary. So what you really need to do is actually say, oh, hello, so welcome. I see you've come back. Would you like a seat? And you actually invite the demon in. It's coming anyway, so you might as well give it a seat, right? And then you can offer it a cup of tea and say, would you like a foot massage? And all other kinds of little analogical things. But every little kindness that you do to this demon, it starts to shrink. It starts to sort of go, oh, okay. So she doesn't hate me after all. Maybe I'm not such a bad guy or girl. And so it gets a little bit smaller, and every kindness that you give, your heart becomes bigger. So whether the demon becomes smaller, it's just the heart becomes bigger, maybe it's both. Yeah? Because the bigger our capacity to hold these things, the less they overwhelm us and the less space they take in our mind. So bit by bit they shrink away, and we realise that the things we thought were demons and really frightening were nothing really. They were just what we call Mara in Buddhism, Mara's like the personification of our innermost demons. And in the verses of the bhikkhunis in those days, they used to just notice Mara and say, Mara, I've seen you. Whenever a doubt came up or whenever a restless thought, it was, Mara, I've seen you. And then Mara used to just slink away. It says with shoulders hunched and all kind of disheartened. It just, she knows me. So they can't have any power over you anymore. So mindfulness is the first kind of friend and ally that we need when we're starting to meet our direct experience. So we have to enter this field of the body, this field of the emotional world with a bit of mindfulness. And mindfulness doesn't judge anything, it actually befriends. It just goes in there quite impartially to shine a light upon what's happening. But along with mindfulness, the other thing that really helps us to meet our experience is the kindness. So you can imagine having mindfulness in one hand and kindness in the other, and you walk in to your inner world with these two. So the kindness helps you to meet things and actually say, okay, anger, there you are, but how are you today? Like, what can I do for you? Is there anything you need? Yeah? So it's not just aware, but it's asking what is needed here to like calm the situation down. And also to be able to stay with that situation long enough for it to open up so that you can see it more fully and understand it. Yeah? So kindness helps us meet it, and then also we have to be kind and gentle in the way we approach things. So we don't always want to just meet it head on. Sometimes we want to like creep in gently, go in slowly, just as though you were trying to swim for the first time and there was a big ocean, that you'd never entered. Maybe you've learned to swim in a swimming pool, but you've never entered the ocean. So at first you just go in with like a few, with your toe or whatever. Is it cold? Is it okay to get in? How strong is the current? And then when you're a bit more confident, you put both feet in and, okay, my ankles are in. And then bit by bit, you get in deeper and deeper until you feel confident enough to just swim straight out into the ocean. Yeah, so in a similar way, we have to approach these emotions gently and incrementally, stage by stage, and not just get into something that we find difficult. But also know that you can always get out, right? Because with the body, as long as you have that anchor, it's like there's a floor underneath you. You're not just in a bottomless ocean. There is somewhere to stand. And one of the really helpful things is to just come back to the earth. If you're feeling a bit kind of spun out, because even if you're connected to the body, sometimes it can be very, sort of ethereal. There's these sort of floaty sensations and you feel like you're not really grounded. So come back to your body, come back to the weightiness, the earth element. You've seen pictures of the Buddha or statues of the Buddha where he's got one hand on the ground. And this was when Mara was confronting him just before he was enlightened. They confronted him by saying, you're not fit for this, you can't do this, who do you think you are? And he said, I call the earth as my witness. That I have developed these qualities for many lifetimes and I'm ready for this and I'm not going to be pushed around anymore. So he called the earth as the witness. So you can do that. You can literally ground yourself with the earth. And just coming back to that solid sense of the body, or perhaps just moving slightly away from the centre of the emotion and moving to the periphery. You can go to the hands, to the soles of the feet. These are usually places in the body which are quite non-confrontational. You don't normally, apart from if you fell over recently, you don't normally get painful feelings in your hands or in the soles of your feet. It's quite neutral. So this is also a nice thing to do. When I was traumatised, the same story, but I only have one story. I guess I'm quite fortunate, really. But I went to see Ajahn Sucitto, who's a very wonderful monk who used to be the abbot at Chithurst, and he listened to me for about 20 minutes, actually, while I just poured out what had happened, and then he also spoke back to me for about the same amount of time with so much wisdom and advice. But one of the things he said was, okay, well, this has happened to you, but you can still see your fingers, he says. And he sort of went, you can still see your fingers. And it was actually really helpful because you can get so much in your head, and just coming back to the fact that I've got a hand and here it is, and it doesn't have to be here, it can be here, and there's a bigger sort of field that I can come back to. Is really, really helpful. So the approach is one thing, how to approach these emotions, and then also how to hold them kindly. And I used to use the example of a little bird, but now I have my own real little bird, because in Australia this year there was a poor little baby honey eater, and they're very cute. They're like black with a bit of white and a bit of yellow on their face. And it was just sitting kind of, somebody had put it in a little plastic bowl and put some tissue paper around it to try and keep it warm, because it had obviously either fallen out of the nest or left the nest and wasn't strong enough to get back again. And at first I thought, oh, we can't touch it, because if we do that, the mother will reject it. So I wasn't quite sure what we should do, but I went up to it anyway and sort of tried to check if it seemed warm enough. And I was amazed to find that it sort of flapped its wings and it jumped out and stood on my hand. I was like, wow, this is so cute. And it seemed to be quite happy there. It was just like holding on with one little leg. And so I went to sit down with it, and then it climbed up like this and was sitting on my shoulder. And then I realised that it trusted me. I mean, I think it trusts everybody there because it's such a safe place, but I was able to, because I was worried it might fly off and I'd lose it, so I was able to like take it off my shoulder and hold it very gently. And I found out that I could hold it a certain way and have these two, like the forefinger and the thumb, at a certain distance that would keep it in place. If it was too loose, like it would be able to fly out, but if I kept it like this, just around its neck, but not too tight, then it would stay. And so this was the way I learned to hold this little thing. I only had it for about 15 minutes or maybe half an hour. And it was quite comfy there, and it would get out from time to time and then get back again. And then one monk came and he told me where it lived, and he said, oh, I think that they live in this bush just behind the dining room. So I went there, and there was a mother bird flying around looking for it. And so I put it on the branch, and it just hopped off onto the branch, and the mother bird came and immediately fed it. And it was just so lovely, to see that she hadn't rejected it and that it had found its home again. But that holding of it was really kind of instructional in a way, that we can hold our feelings similarly. We don't go in there and like, I've got to get my attention right inside it. I mean, sometimes you might feel you can, because the mind might be very empowered, you might have a lot of metta, a lot of resilience, and the sensation just isn't too dense or whatever, you feel you can penetrate it. And sometimes, in that case, something can just disappear in an instant, even really heavy pain, even heavy emotional pain. If you meet it with that kind of mind, it can just disperse almost in an instant. But at other times, we're not ready to do that, so we have to kind of skirt it, stay on the periphery and don't just go straight in. I can't remember who it is that puts it that way, but one teacher says, don't stare at the sensation, which is quite nice. Because that's quite intimidating for anybody if you really stare at them. So don't do that to your emotions either. So that's meeting it and welcoming it, and then we have to learn to accept it. So the acceptance is a kind of equanimity, and acceptance also carries wisdom. So what helps us to accept these things is to see that they are changing, that they do arise and they do disappear. They're not permanent. Yeah? And as I said before, it's not only that they arise and disappear, but that they're caused. They arise due to a cause, and they disappear due to a cause. And then we can get quite skillful in our meditation, because we're not supposed to just stay with things forever and ever and ever. One aspect of mindfulness is to be with, but another aspect of wisdom and of samatha practice as well is to calm these things down, to see what would soothe, what would actually pacify, and bring these things to cessation. So that again involves going in usually with a certain attitude, a certain way of looking. And I like the attitude of kindness. I just find it works in pretty much every situation. Sometimes that can be nuanced a little bit. Instead of the kindness, it could be patience, or it could be gentleness. It could even be giving your trust to a situation, like looking at it with a trusting attitude. So we're starting to look at ways to just, calm the situation down, and this is a wisdom practice. Yeah? And you'll see that one of the best ways, we were saying about causes and what causes things to arise and what causes them to continue. Usually it's some kind of sense of ownership or identification with it, or craving and aversion. They both actually keep things going because we're fueling them. We're kind of saying, this is a problem, I want to get rid of it, or this is a problem, or this is good, and I want to keep it, and that just solidifies the whole thing and keeps the suffering going for longer. Whereas when we bring kindness in, that has a pacifying effect, so you can see that that's undermining hindrances. It's not creating something, it's actually undermining the course of things that we've created. So again, just like the simile of using the coarse peg, or the fine peg rather, to knock out the coarse peg. You know, we can use these kind attitudes and different ways of looking to start to pacify and knock out the coarser emotions and feelings. And the other really beautiful thing about using these skillful attitudes is that after a while, you realise you're creating your reality. You realise that the way you're actually looking at it starts to change the reality. So you start off by looking kindly, but what you end up observing is kindness itself. Or you start off by making peace, and then the object becomes peace. It's like your attitude of mind actually becomes what you're aware of in the end. Yeah? So you make love to the object, and the object becomes love. That's all that's left. Yeah? So obviously it's not that easy. But I just wanted to go through a few little ways to work with our emotions and thoughts and anything else that comes up, and to, you know, so that we can stop rejecting these things, stop condemning them. You know, we can actually make peace even with things like despair or crazy doubt. You know, I had lots of crazy doubt on my rains retreat, but it does pass. And at the same time, you know, when we can experience these things and meet them wisely, they become a kind of fertilizer. It's a compost, you know, that gives beautiful vegetables in the vegetable garden. So it's not possible to develop compassion without having suffered to some extent and without understanding suffering. And that also opens you up to understand the suffering of others and why they behave the way they do too. So that is more than enough. And yeah. So if you'd like to take a little break or a little stretch, we'll start the meditation in about 5 minutes.